as a follow-on to the thesis of the Rebbe that ascribing a degree of divinity to creations that in of themselves have no free will and praying to them was deemed to be avodah zarah. The Rebbe went one step further and included into the category of avodah zarah aspects of the Kabbalistic model, which included praying to those forces that inhabit the worlds of Yetzirah and Bria, praying to Malachim, praying to Neshamot, and even those forces that make up the world of Atzilut. For in doing so, we would be in violation of Devarim 4:7, Chol Koreinu Elav, that one must pray to God and not to any other force, physical or spiritual. This view, although quite logical, will run into a headlong clash with Minhag Yisrael. One or two examples. The Nusach of Tfilat Ne'ilah, following the repetition of the Shmona Esrei, includes the following piyut. The piyut referred to as Midat HaRachamim. Midat HaRachamim refers to one of the 10 midot that comprise the world of Atzilut. In that piyut we ask, Midat HaRachamim Aleinu Hitgalgali, turn to us the attribute of mercy. Present our supplications before your Maker, referring to God. Plead for the compassion on behalf of your people. Every heart is in pain and every head is ailing. Midat HaRachamim is one of God's creations, and clearly we appear to be singling out Midat HaRachamim and addressing a prayer to that midah. And therefore, this piyut would appear to be in conflict with the requirement that one pray to God and not to a force, a being created by God. Another problematic aspect of Minhag Yisrael is the visitation of the grave sites of tzaddikim. Common practice nowadays is to pray at the Ma'arat HaMachpelah and at Kever Rachel. An analysis of this minhag was the subject of an essay authored by Shlomo Brody, connected to the Yeshivat HaKotel, who writes that Jews praying in cemeteries has existed since antiquity. It should be noted, however, that over time this has been the subject of historical debate. While this practice is commonplace, there are contrasting justifications and various meanings and limitations have been applied. On one side of the argument you have a view expressed in the Medrash Lekach Tov in explaining why the burial place of Moshe Rabbeinu remains unknown, as testified in the Chumash text. The Medrash asserts that on account of the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu's burial location might become a place of worship in its own right, God decided to keep that location hidden from mankind. There's also a view in the Gemara that the last resting place of Talmidei Chachamim need not be marked with a tombstone because their teachings would keep their memory alive. And thirdly, the Rambam in Hilchot Avelut maintains that one should not visit graves. This view is echoed also in The Jewish Way in Death and Mourning by Rabbi Maurice Lamb, who writes that the traditional attitude of Judaism is not to encourage excessive grave visitation. The rabbis were apprehensive on two counts. One, it prevented the mourners to move on. That would be a personal issue. A second reason, more applicable to the community at large, given the acceptance within Judaism that the neshama has now metaphorically moved to a more spiritual state, closer to God, there was always going to be the risk then the people, in their ignorance, would direct their prayers to the neshama of the tzaddik rather than to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This would violate the cardinal principle of Judaism that God is one, and that there are no intermediaries between man and God. On the other hand, we have a Gemara in Ta'anit that asks, Lama yotzin lebet hakavarot? What's the function of people who go to pray at the grave sites of tzaddikim? And goes on to cite two Amoraic opinions. Chad amar hareyanu chashuvim lefenecha kemetim, to instill into the individual a feeling of humility and a motivation for teshuvah. V'chad amar, while the other maintains that kadei sheyevakashur aleinu meitim rachamim, that the dead, obviously the neshamot of the dead, should beseech God for rachamim upon his people. Two of many examples that would appear on the surface at least to be in conflict with the view of the Rebbe that one who prays to spiritual entities is also in violation of Avodah Zarah restrictions, and the command of one should pray to God alone, which begs the question, how does present-day Minhag Yisrael justify the prayers that are said at the grave site of a tzaddik? There are obviously subtleties involved, which I shall look at after dealing with the issue of Yitro and his rejection of Avodah Zarah as presented in Midrashic material.